really doesn't care about his personal image, which I think is a positive. A governor who can go fishing when President Clinton comes to town. I don't think there are too many presidents who will say that about other governors. So I think he wants to be a good governor, not to be reelected, but to be a good governor. So I think that we're not going to see that make a record kind of a governor. But term limits is really an open season for the bureaucrats to run government. And you have to have leadership to begin with to be willing to say, all right, no, go for broke. And that's what we have to find out, is where that leadership is.
Yeah, I'm Carl Hostic, a City Club member. We talked about Trojan horses in Elaine's comments. I think you left out one measure 47 that I hope you'll comment on, and that is the requirement that any backfills at the local level go to a vote of the people, and that vote of the people has to have the 50% of the people participating unless it's a general election. The governor said he's going to cut local government loose, and so many of those effects will be felt at the local level, and I would like to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's one of those tricky little provisions. Remember, we had this come up before in a previous ballot measure, and we said, gee, we're going to have to vote on whether or not we pay for stoplights in Corvallis in a statewide ballot. And there's a version of that here. This is going to get incredibly tricky because the people who wrote Measure 47 are going to be watching all public money like a hawk. If there was any relationship between a fee raise and property taxes to pay for whatever the fee raise is now going to cover, we were talking earlier, U of O football tickets maybe, whether or not your tuition goes up at your community college, whether or not your high school decides that it needs to bring in another teacher for music or whatever and it wants to pay for it in a different way. Anything like that could conceivably have to go to a vote of the people. In California, when they passed Prop 13, they had something similar in there. What they did is they said you had to have a 60% vote in order to approve these new things. For a period of 10 years, nothing passed in that entire state. Now that we're off almost 30 years or 20 or 15 years later, looking at Prop 13, now some library bonds are passing and swimming pool districts are passing. But this just sets up the tax revolt to hit all of us all the time. This is the surest way towards joining Mississippi and Arkansas in terms of their wonderful services for the residents and the great reputations they have in the United States. I'm absolutely convinced. Now, in California, part of the problem they had was when the Cold War ended, the defense industry absolutely collapsed. Because of these voting provisions, just like we're going to have here in Oregon, and because of the limitations on property taxes, California could not respond to that huge change in its economy. And that, to me, is the biggest problem with 47. Yeah, there'll be hurt, and we'll adjust. I mean, we're gonna get by. But when the crisis comes, and economies go up and down, when the crisis comes, our hands are tied, and we're not going to be able to respond quickly enough. And Oregon could be heading down in a spiral.
Just to respond to that, that is another message in 47, is that we're going to have a 50% vote on any tax measures. Remind you, the state of Washington has a 60% vote and has had for a long time, and they do pass things. So I'm not sure that in itself is the worst part of 47. But I think we're going to have to, I hope that today, frankly, is the last time we're talking about it that way. That's part of the problem we got into Measure 5, hand-wringing for months and for years. It's the law of the land. It's going to be tested in the courts. Absolutely right about the proponents of it watching everything that's going on. We can get out of everything. I mean, we can, we do not have to go down that negative doom and gloom road. We may very well, if all we're going to be doing is hand-wringing about the bad things that a good portion of Oregonians did to them. I mean, we've met the enemy, and it's us. And I didn't say that for the first time.
Steve Novak, City Club member. The passage of Measure 47 raises for me a question about whether you are aware of any polls on where Oregonians think their tax dollars go. On the federal level, I mean, I know that there are polls showing that half the country thinks the biggest item in the budget is welfare or foreign aid, each of which makes up 1% of the budget. And I wonder if Oregonians have really decided that we can't afford schools and police protection and fire protection, or if a large percentage are laboring under the impression that most of their money is still going to refurbish the state archives.
Well, I think it's not where it's going, it's the fact that there's a definite suspicion that there's fat in the budget. We can cut, come on now. I mean, we see one big salary that looks out of line. We see what happens with in fact, talking about one of the races, I thought that the Hill-Klarno race was going to be closer for the very fact that she brought up that he had squandered so much money, squandered in quotes, furnishing his office. I think there's a definite suspicion still, and I go back to the Reagan years, and I think, thank you, President Reagan, I think he ran very effectively against the very government in which he was head, and we're still seeing that. It's not where does the money go, but there's enough fat in the budget we can still cut, and I cannot pay for government any longer on my property taxes. I think that's what people are saying.
Yeah, Oregonians do not differentiate where the money goes very much. And that's for instance, Measure 32, $750 million. Oh my gosh, it's from the lottery, people. It's not where you think it's coming from. And that message was totally lost. That message was totally lost.
Ray Polani, a City Club member. I think I'm going to go to Measure 32. Elaine, in Clark County, which was the first county that said no to the light rail, they then decided that they were very interested in commuter rail, using existing rail lines. In fact, so much so, ahead of light rail. What is the likelihood of using the existing rail line to Clackamas County, which could be low cost and an early implementation and a direct response to the peak hour congestion, which is what it's all about?
Well, I think, Ray, you probably know more about that than I do, and I would say to you, as I understand it, the commuter rail people actually, you or your group was not in favor of light rail. So I'm only posing that to you because I think that's very interesting that people who had been proponents of light rail or rail for years in this community now see an alternative, which is commuter rail using the existing tracks, which is an entirely different system. It's not light rail, of course, it's heavy cars. So I mean, we're going to leave that to people who know more than I do, but in Clark County, the commuter rail would take people from downtown Vancouver to downtown Portland. That's the only place it's taking them, and they are going ahead looking at that, which is entirely different than the concept of light rail throughout the metropolitan area, from shopping areas to other shopping areas to work, and not using downtown Portland as the only destination. So I think the whole concept is different. Not that one is yes and one is no, but I don't think commuter rail is going to get us out of our congested roads and all the other transportation problems we're seeing. It's the same, well...
And you could bet the political reality is with the failure of Measure 32, the existing rail option obviously is going to come up now. Sure. It's obviously going to be something that they're going to consider. So it's back up, bubbling somewhere near the top of the table if it's getting that far.
B.J. Seymour, City Club member. I had a whole bunch of questions in mind, but Professor Moore came up with something that knocked all the rest out of my head when he said he would propose that a whole bunch of sections of the Constitution be gotten rid of, and in their place put in maximums for property tax, sales tax, and income tax. Given the climate in which people want to cut taxes, no matter what impact that has, wouldn't everybody just vote for a very low maximum on each of the three taxes and wind up completely crippling whatever is left of our services?
That could possibly happen. However, if you do this three tax thing, you get to cut our income tax rate and make the highest limit lower than what we currently have. And you get to cut our property tax rate and make the upper limit lower than we already have, say $10 per thousand. And then you throw in the sales tax, okay, and say, okay, that's going to make up the difference to balance this thing. You remember when we talked about tax reform in this state, there's been a lot of people who've been saying, well, okay, property tax, I can see we need it here, but let's go to a sales tax. If we do, then let's just get rid of all property tax. Because let's say property tax, which is a tax on wealth, is unfair, whereas sales tax, which is a flat tax and hits poor people more, is more fair, they say. Okay, well, whatever. But in any case, it's something that clearly needs to be packaged and thought about in order to put it together, but I think that it can be done. Because what you're doing is saying, hey, you're used to a property tax bill, we're going to cut that rate. Now, the trade-off is you're going to have to pay 4% when you buy something down at Fred Meyer. But hey, don't you want that trade-off instead of getting your property tax bill that sends you through the roof every year? I think there's a political way to do it.
This will have to be the last question, and it'll have to be a quick one.
Very quick. Good afternoon, Robert Sachs, club member. I don't know anybody who wasn't annoyed with the number of initiatives on the ballot, and I know even fewer people who are aware that a good number of those initiatives were referred out by the legislature. With the legislature with its hands tied, just in sheer numbers in each party, do you think that in 2 years we're going to see even more measures referred out by the legislature so that we'll have 3 voters' pamphlets?
You didn't like the size of your voters pamphlet, huh? No, I don't think we're going to see more because those things that came out of the legislature were out of a Republican legislature. Look at those legislative referrals. They were, hi, we're the Republican legislature. We would like to tie our own hands so you can prevent us from legislating again. We're not going to have that. We're not going to have that simply because the House is so close. They're not going to be able to put things together. The Senate will try this. I'm not sure. Brady Adams will probably be the new president of the Senate. A lot of this, you have a sense, Gordon Smith was kind of saying, gee, I'm posturing, let's try to get these things out there so that the right wing of my party really likes me. I don't think those dynamics are going to be there. It's always a danger, but usually what we get out of the legislative referrals is bookkeeping measures, which quite frankly is what that veterans loan thing was all about. Okay, and you know, bookkeeping, great. I can go through and say, oh, gee, I guess that part of the Constitution needs an and instead of an or. I can vote for that. But this time, it was rather amusing to watch prevent us from legislating again. I don't think we're going to see it.
I think we are going to see it because I think that the legislature needs an easy out, and in this state, they have it every time. They have it with the tax measures. They refer every single one of them. I mean, I see no end to this number of initiatives, frankly, and referrals from the state. But again, you know, that's one thing we still have as Oregonians is our intelligence and our ability to be discriminating. And in many cases, there's some very good votes out there. Let's say there were votes that were made on basis of people thinking about what they wanted to say. So I don't see any change, particularly because the legislature is the same, and they're cowards then, and they're going to be cowards the next session.
Thank you, Elaine and Jim. By my count, we've learned at least 4 things today. We are not mischievous. We are schizophrenic, or at least sometimes stupid. We are not innocent anymore, but we may have some redeeming social values. So I hope that with that optimistic thought, all of you will join me here next week as we learn about outsourcing. Thank you. We are adjourned.